I was an ER doctor, jaded and burned out, until one red hat pushed me over the edge. Refusing to treat a patient, I inadvertently ignited a national security crisis. The ER on a Tuesday night is its own special kind of hell. It's a symphony of suffering conducted under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. The metallic tang of blood, the sharp scent of antiseptic, and the faint underlying smell of human despair all blend into an unforgettable perfume that clings to your scrubs long after you've clocked out. I'd been an ER doctor for 8 years, and I thought I'd become numb to it. I thought I had built up calluses on my soul, thick enough to handle anything. I was wrong. The past couple of years had chipped away at that armor, piece by piece. It wasn't the injuries or the tragedies that wore me down. It was the people, the sheer, unadulterated hostility. We went from being heroes at the start of the pandemic to being the enemy. We were shills for big pharma, government puppets, crisis actors. I'd been screamed at, spat on, and had a patient's family member try to swing at me because I told them their loved one needed a ventilator, not a dose of horse dewormer they read about on Facebook. So, yeah, I was raw. My empathy, the very thing that made me want to be a doctor in the first place, was running on fumes. Tonight was particularly brutal. A 5-car pileup on the interstate had flooded us with trauma cases, and we were running on a skeleton crew. I was suturing a deep laceration on a terrified teenager's arm when the paramedics burst through the ambulance bay doors with another one. Male, approximately 65. The lead paramedic, a guy named Dave I'd known for years, rattled off. Fell from a ladder, looks like about 15 feet. Possible compound fracture in the left tibia, complaining of severe back pain. Vitals are stable, but he's in a world of hurt. I finished my last stitch, told the nurse to get the kid prepped for imaging, and turned toward the incoming gurney. "All right, put him in Trauma 3, I commanded, already pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. "Let's get a full workup, Page Orthopedics, and get me a—" My voice trailed off as they wheeled him under the light. And then I saw it. Perched on his head, a bright, garish cherry-red hat. The 4 words emblazoned on it in bold white letters seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "Make America Great Again." It was like a gut punch. My jaw tightened instantly. The man on the gurney was exactly the type you'd expect to be wearing it. He had a weathered, leathery face, a scowl etched permanently into his features, and a jaw set so stubbornly it looked like it was carved from granite. He was grunting in pain, but his eyes were sharp, suspicious, and full of a defiant anger that I had come to associate with that exact hat. He looked at me, at my brown skin, at the name on my ID badge, Dr. Ben Carter, and his scowl deepened. "Took you long enough," he rasped, his voice a low growl. "Are you the doctor, or just another pencil pusher?" Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud crack, but a quiet, cold, final break. All the frustration, all the abuse, all the nights spent worrying about bringing some new virus home to my family, while people like him called it a hoax. It all coalesced into a single, ice-cold decision. I looked at him, the man who represented every ignorant, science-denying, hate-filled comment I'd ever had to endure. He wasn't just a patient anymore. He was a symbol of the willful ignorance that was making my job, and my life, a living hell. The Hippocratic Oath says, first, do no harm. But what about the harm done to us? What about the slow-burn psychological trauma inflicted on healthcare workers every single day by people who wave their flags of freedom while actively harming their communities? I stood there for a second, the cacophony of the ER fading into a dull hum. I saw Dave, the paramedic, looking at me expectantly. I saw my nurse, Sarah, ready with a tablet to take notes. And I saw the man in the red hat, glaring up at me as if I were something he'd scraped off his boot. I took a deep breath, pulled off my gloves with a sharp snap, and dropped them into the biohazard bin. I turned to Sarah, my voice devoid of all emotion. "Page Dr. Albright," I said, my voice flat. "Have him take this one." Sarah's eyes widened. Dr. Albright was a competent doctor, but he was also a well-known conservative, the kind of guy who had a flag decal on his pickup truck. The subtext was clear. "Ben, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. "Albright is swamped with the pile-up victims." The man on the gurney grunted. "What the hell is going on? Just fix my leg, damn it." I didn't even look at him. I looked directly at Sarah. "I don't care," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I'm not treating him." I turned my back and started to walk away, a cold, hollow feeling spreading through my chest. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong on every professional and ethical level. but in that moment it felt like the only way I could reclaim a tiny shred of my own sanity. I felt Sarah's horrified stare on my back. I could hear the man on the gurney starting to shout, his voice laced with indignation and profanity. I didn't care. I just needed to get away, to breathe air that wasn't tainted by that hat and the ideology it represented. I was almost at the door to the doctor's lounge when a new voice cut through the noise, sharp and authoritative. "Hold it right there." I stopped, my hand on the door, and turned around. Two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits were standing by the main nurse's station. They didn't look like family members or hospital administrators. They radiated an aura of severe, no-nonsense authority. They were flanking our hospital's head of security, who looked pale and terrified. One of the men, the taller one with graying temples and eyes that could chip ice, stepped forward. He ignored the patient. He ignored the nurses. His gaze locked directly onto me. His voice was dangerously calm, but it carried across the entire ER, silencing everything. "Are you Dr. Carter?" he asked. I nodded numbly, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. He didn't blink. "Are you the physician who just refused medical care to General Miller?" The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. General Miller. The name echoed in the sudden, dead silence of the ER. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of the scowling man in the red hat with the high-ranking military title. It didn't compute. Generals were in dress uniforms, flanked by aides, giving press conferences at the Pentagon. They weren't lying on gurneys in my ER after falling off a ladder, wearing the political equivalent of a middle finger on their head. My initial shock was quickly being replaced by a tidal wave of ice-cold dread. This was bad. This was career-ending, life-altering bad. The man on the gurney, General Miller, apparently let out a pained groan. "For crying out loud, Harris, stop making a scene and let the man do his job," he grumbled, his voice strained. He tried to shift his weight and winced, a sharp hiss of pain escaping his lips. "Just fix the leg." The man in the suit, Harris, didn't so much as glance at him. His eyes, like chips of granite, remained locked on me. "Dr. Carter," he repeated, his voice dropping to a low, menacing purr that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "I believe I asked you a question." My throat felt like it was full of sand. Yes," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "I am Dr. Carter. I was just assessing the caseload and delegating to another physician." It was the weakest, most pathetic excuse I could have possibly manufactured, and we both knew it. The look on his face told me he saw right through my transparent lie. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of expensive cologne and sheer power rolled off him. "You were delegating," he said, the word dripping with contempt. "Dr. Carter, let me be very clear. General Miller is not just some weekend warrior who fell off a ladder while cleaning his gutters. He is the Deputy Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He has a classified briefing at the Pentagon at 0800 tomorrow morning that directly concerns national security. So this isn't about delegating. This is about you getting back to that trauma bay and doing the job you are sworn to do. Am I understood?" He wasn't asking. It was an order wrapped in the thinnest veneer of civility. My medical license flashed before my eyes, followed by visions of lawsuits, public disgrace, and the end of everything I had worked for my entire life. The burnout, the righteous anger, the feeling of taking a stand, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, sickening fear. I couldn't speak, so I just gave a sharp, jerky nod. "Good," Harris said, his expression unchanging. He stepped back, gesturing with his head toward the trauma bay. "Now." It was the longest walk of my life. Every eye in the ER was on me. Sarah, my nurse, looked at me with a mixture of horror and pity. Dave, the paramedic, just shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment on his face. I could feel the judgment radiating from them, from everyone. And they were right. I had let my personal feelings, my political exhaustion, cloud my professional duty. I had betrayed my oath. I had become the very thing I despised, someone who judged a person based on a label instead of seeing the patient who needed my help. The weight of my failure pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I reached the gurney and looked down at General Miller. He was pale, his face beaded with sweat, the stubborn scowl replaced by a grimace of pure agony. He looked up at me, his eyes clouded with pain but still sharp. "About time, Doc," he breathed. "Thought you were going to let me bleed out over a piece of headwear?" He knew. Of course, he knew. The shame burned in my gut like acid. "I apologize, sir," I mumbled, my voice thick. "Let's take a look at you." I forced my hands to be steady as I reached for his chart and began my assessment, my mind racing to catch up, to switch back into doctor mode. Severe pain in the left tibia and the lower back. Blood pressure is a little high, but that's expected with this level of pain. My hands went to his leg, gently probing the area around the obvious, grotesque angle of the break. He grunted but didn't cry out. The man was tough. I had to give him that. But as I continued my examination, moving from his leg to his torso, checking for other injuries, a flicker of professional instinct cut through the fog of my shame. Something was wrong, something beyond the broken leg. His skin had a clammy, grayish pallor that wasn't just from the pain, and while his right hand was clenched in a fist, I noticed a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his left. "General," I said, my voice sharpened with a new kind of urgency. "Can you feel this?" I ran the back of my pen along the sole of his right foot. He flinched. "Yeah, I feel it." I did the same to his left foot. Nothing. "Sir?" I asked, a knot of professional fear now eclipsing my personal one. I looked up at his face. His eyes seemed unfocused, his pupils sluggish. "General Miller? Can you squeeze my fingers?" I held out my hands. His right hand gripped mine with surprising strength. His left hand just twitched. And then I saw it. A slight drooping on the left side of his face, a slackness around his eye and mouth that hadn't been there moments ago. The fall from the ladder wasn't the main event. It was a symptom. The back pain, the tremor. My blood ran cold. "Get me a crash cart in here, now!" I yelled, my voice cracking with adrenaline. "Page neurology, and get me a head CT stat. He's not just injured, he's—" But I never finished the sentence. As I looked into his eyes, they suddenly rolled back in his head, and his whole body began to convulse violently on the gurney. Panic exploded in the trauma bay like a grenade. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor escalated into a frantic, high-pitched shriek. "He's in seizure!" Sarah yelled, already pushing the crash cart into position. The two suits, Harris and his silent partner, surged forward, their professional composure cracking for the first time. "What's happening? What did you do?" Harris demanded, his voice raw with alarm. I didn't have time for him. "Get back," I barked, the adrenaline sharpening my voice to a razor's edge. "Give us room." For once he obeyed, taking a stunned step back. My shame, my political anger, my career anxieties, they were all gone, burned away by the pure, primal instinct of a doctor fighting for a life. This man was no longer a symbol, no longer a general, no longer a political opponent. He was my patient, and he was dying. "Push 5 of Ativan, now!" I ordered Sarah, who was already drawing up the medication with practiced efficiency. "Someone get me an airway kit." I worked to protect his head from slamming against the gurney's metal rails while trying to get a quick read on his vitals. His blood pressure was skyrocketing, his oxygen saturation was plummeting. The seizure was starving his brain of oxygen. Come on," I muttered under my breath, my hands moving on pure muscle memory. "The Ativan's in," Sarah confirmed. We waited a tense, agonizing 10 seconds for the benzodiazepine to work its magic. The violent convulsions began to subside, his muscles unclenching, leaving him limp and unresponsive on the gurney. The immediate crisis was over, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying. His breathing was shallow, ragged. He was postictal, but this was more than just a simple seizure. This was catastrophic. "What happened?" Harris's voice was quieter now, laced with a fear that mirrored my own. I didn't look at him. My eyes were glued to the monitor, to my patient's face. "The fall wasn't the primary issue," I said, my mind working 1,000 miles a minute, putting the pieces together. "The unilateral weakness, the facial droop, the back pain. I think he had a stroke, a massive one. He probably lost his balance on the ladder because of it. The seizure was a result of the intracranial pressure." The words came out clipped, precise. This was my world. In the controlled chaos of a medical crisis, I was king. The neurology resident, a young, bright-eyed doctor named Chen, came running in. "Dr. Carter, you paged?" "Massive CVA. Just had a grand mal seizure. Postictal now." I rattled off. "BP is through the roof. We need to get him to the CT scanner 5 minutes ago, but we need to stabilize him first. Let's get a line in and start a mannitol drip to reduce the swelling in his brain." As we worked a frantic, coordinated dance of medicine, I could feel the gravity of the situation pressing in. This wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a matter of national security. The Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army lying unresponsive in my ER. The implications were staggering. Harris was on his phone, his back to us, his voice a low, urgent murmur. I could only catch snippets. Secure the floor. No, no press. Notify the chairman. A hospital in Maryland, for God's sake. It was surreal. Outside this little bubble of life and death, the gears of power were turning. A world I couldn't even imagine was responding to the crisis unfolding in my hands. We got him stabilized enough for transport. As we wheeled the gurney out of the trauma bay, the scene in the ER had transformed. Harris's partner and several uniformed hospital security guards had formed a perimeter. The other patients were being rerouted. The usual chaos had been replaced by a tense, military-grade lockdown. We rushed him to the CT scanner, the entire team moving with silent, focused intensity. I stood in the control room with the radiology tech, watching the cross-sectional images of his brain appear on the screen, slice by horrifying slice. And then I saw it. A massive dark bloom spreading across the entire right hemisphere of his brain. It was a hemorrhagic stroke, a bleed, and it was one of the worst I had ever seen. The pressure on his brainstem would be immense. The damage was catastrophic, and, in all likelihood, irreversible. My God, the tech whispered beside me. I felt a cold pit form in my stomach. The man on that table wasn't just going to miss his meeting at the Pentagon. He was probably never going to speak, or walk, or even recognize his own family again, if he survived at all. My earlier actions, my petty, self-righteous refusal to treat him, came crashing back with the force of a physical blow. I had wasted precious minutes. Minutes where we could have been assessing him, where we could have noticed the subtle neurological signs before the seizure. Did those minutes matter? In a bleed this massive, probably not. The outcome was likely sealed the moment the vessel in his brain burst, but I would never know for sure, and that uncertainty would haunt me for the rest of my life. We got him back to the ER and prepped him for transfer to the neuro-ICU. Harris was waiting for us, his face a pale, grim mask. He had the look of a man who had just seen the world shift on its axis. "What's the prognosis, doctor?" he asked, his voice strained. I took a deep breath. There was no easy way to say it. "It's not good," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "It's a massive intracerebral hemorrhage. The damage is extensive. We're doing everything we can to manage the swelling, but you need to prepare yourself for the worst." Harris just nodded slowly, absorbing the blow. He looked over at the still, silent figure on the gurney, the red hat now sitting on a small table beside him, a ridiculously trivial object in the face of such profound tragedy. Then he looked back at me. His eyes weren't angry anymore. They were filled with a weary, hollowed-out resignation. "The general's wife is on her way," he said. "She's flying in from Andrews Air Force Base. She'll be here in an hour." He paused, and his next words sent a fresh chill down my spine. "She knows you refuse to treat him." The words landed like punches. "She knows you refuse to treat him." My blood turned to ice water. Of all the consequences, I had imagined lawsuits, board reviews, public humiliation. The thought of facing the wife of the man I had nearly condemned hadn't even crossed my mind. Now, it was the only thing I could think about. An hour. I had 1 hour before my personal, catastrophic failure of judgment would have a face, a name, and a voice. A voice that would have every right to scream, to accuse, to tear me apart. And I would deserve every single word. The thought was paralyzing. Harris must have seen the terror in my eyes because his expression softened, just for a fraction of a second. "Someone on your staff talked," he said, his voice flat. "It doesn't matter who. What matters is what happens next." He gestured down the now cleared hallway. "The hospital administrator is waiting for you in his office. You need to go. Now." The walk to Administrator Thompson's office felt like a walk to the gallows. The normal hospital sounds were muted, distant, as if I were underwater. My mind was a chaotic storm of self-recrimination. The red hat. It all came back to the stupid red hat. I had allowed a piece of fabric, a political slogan, to momentarily erase 8 years of training, a lifetime of aspiring to be a healer, and the sacred oath I took. I had judged a man's worthiness for care based on his presumed beliefs. In that moment, I hadn't been a doctor. I'd been a partisan, no better than the people I railed against for politicizing medicine. I had become my own worst enemy. Thompson's office was on the top floor, a world away from the grit and grime of the ER. It was all polished mahogany and plush leather, with a panoramic view of the city lights. Thompson himself was a man who looked like he was born in a suit. He was pacing when I entered, his face ashen. The hospital's lead counsel, a sharp-looking woman named Ms. Davies, was sitting in one of the leather chairs, a thick file open on her lap. Neither of them looked happy to see me. "Ben," Thompson started, foregoing any pleasantries. "Sit down." His voice was tight with controlled fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I opened my mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but he held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't. I've spent the last hour on the phone with the Department of Defense, the Surgeon General of the Army, and a lawyer from the White House counsel's office. They are displeased. That's the most diplomatic word I can find." Ms. Davies chimed in, her tone crisp and clinical. "Dr. Carter, from a legal standpoint, you are in an indefensible position. You violated EMTALA regulations, your fiduciary duty to the patient, and the hospital's code of conduct. To put it bluntly, your career in medicine is likely over. Our job now is to mitigate the damage to this institution." The words were cold, clinical, and utterly devastating. Over. Just like that. The life I had poured my blood, sweat, and soul into was finished. "We've already prepared a statement," Thompson continued, picking up a paper from his desk. "It will state that you have been placed on immediate and indefinite administrative leave pending a full investigation. Your access to all hospital facilities and systems will be revoked at the end of this meeting." He couldn't even look at me. He was looking at the paper, at the view, at anywhere but the man whose life he was systematically dismantling. I just sat there, numb. The fight had gone out of me, replaced by a vast, empty ache. They were right. I had done it. This was the price. "And his wife?" I asked, my voice barely a croak. Thompson finally met my eyes, and I saw a flicker of something pity, maybe. "Mrs. Miller is being escorted to a private waiting room. Harris has been insistent that she be allowed to speak with you before you leave." My stomach churned. It wasn't a request. It was a sentence. They were going to make me face her. The next 30 minutes were a blur of paperwork and protocol. I signed forms I didn't read, handed over my ID badge and pager. Each action felt like another nail in the coffin of my career. Finally, it was time. Thompson escorted me himself, a silent, grim warden leading me to my fate. The private waiting room was small and tastefully decorated, designed to insulate families from the harsh reality of the hospital. And sitting in a high-backed chair, her posture ramrod straight, was a woman who radiated an aura of quiet, formidable strength. She was in her early 60s, elegant even in her simple traveling clothes. Her face was etched with worry, but her eyes, a piercing blue, were clear and steady. She wasn't crying. She looked like a woman who had faced down her fair share of crises and refused to break. This was Eleanor Miller. Thompson mumbled a brief, awkward introduction and then fled, leaving me alone with her. The silence was deafening. I stood there, a disgraced doctor in wrinkled scrubs, unable to meet her gaze. I waited for the explosion, for the tears, for the rage. It never came. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice calm and measured, with a faint southern accent that was both gentle and steely. "Please sit." Her composure was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. I sank into the chair opposite her, feeling small and utterly ashamed. "I have been told," she began, her eyes boring into me, "that when my husband was brought here, bleeding and in agony, you saw his hat and refused to treat him. Is that true?" I couldn't lie. Not to her. "Yes," I whispered, the words scraping my throat. "It is." I braced myself, but instead of anger, her expression shifted into something I couldn't read. It was a deep, profound sadness. "That hat," she said, her voice softening slightly. "He never wore it in public. Never. He put it on this morning to work in the yard, because it was the only clean hat he could find. It was a gift from his brother, a stupid, silly, gag gift." She paused, taking a slow, shaky breath. "My husband, Dr. Carter, is a decorated soldier who has served this country for 40 years. He has commanded troops of every color, creed, and political affiliation. He has risked his life for the ideals of this nation, ideals that include a person's right to believe whatever they want. He believes that what unites us is stronger than what divides us." She leaned forward, and her eyes, now glistening with unshed tears, locked onto mine. "He would have given his life for you, Doctor, and you wouldn't even touch him because of a hat his brother gave him." Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow, stripping away the last of my defenses. The image I'd built of General Miller, the ignorant, hate-filled caricature, shattered into a million pieces. In its place was a man, a husband, a soldier who had been reduced to a political symbol by me, a doctor who was supposed to see beyond such things. The shame was suffocating. I couldn't just apologize. The word felt hollow, laughably inadequate for the magnitude of my failure. Instead, the truth, raw and ugly, spilled out of me. "Mrs. Miller," I began, my voice thick with emotion, "there is no excuse for what I did. None. I was tired. I was angry at the world, at the state of things, at the constant attacks on science and on people like me. When I saw that hat, I didn't see a patient. I saw a symbol of everything that has made the last few years so painful. I let my bitterness and my prejudice override my oath and my humanity. I failed him. I failed my profession. And I failed you. What I did was unforgivable, and I will live with that for the rest of my life." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and shameful. I didn't try to wipe them away. I deserved this reckoning. I expected her to stand up and walk away, to leave me to drown in my disgrace. But she didn't move. She just watched me, her expression unreadable, letting the weight of my confession settle in the quiet room. After a long moment she spoke, her voice softer than before. "My husband's favorite quote was from General Patton," she said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "I don't measure a man's success by how high he climbs, but by how high he bounces when he hits bottom. You are at the bottom, Dr. Carter. What you do now is what will define you." She stood up, not to leave, but to walk over to the small window. "I have seen what hatred and division are doing to our country. I see it every day. It's like a poison, and it seems no one is immune, not even doctors." She turned back to me, her blue eyes searching my face. "My husband is in the hands of your colleagues now. I have to have faith in them. But I have a choice. I can let what you did add to the poison, or I can try to find an antidote. Demanding your ruin won't heal my husband. It won't fix what's broken in the world. It will just create more brokenness." I stared at her, stunned into silence by her grace. She was offering me a path forward when I had expected only condemnation. What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I want you to go back into that hospital," she said, her voice firm. "Not as a doctor for now, but as the man who is responsible for what happened. I want you to talk to Dr. Chen, the neurology resident. I want you to give him the full timeline of my husband's arrival, including the minutes you wasted. Every detail, every observation you made before the seizure could be important. And then, I want you to go home, and I want you to think, really think, about the kind of doctor you want to be when you get the chance to bounce back." With that, she opened the door and was gone, leaving me alone with her staggering act of mercy. Her words galvanized me. I found Dr. Chen and I told him everything, omitting nothing of my shameful delay, detailing every subtle neurological sign I had initially missed. He listened intently, making notes, his expression professional and unjudging. He told me the information was helpful, that it confirmed their timeline of the stroke's progression. It was a small, insignificant act of penance, but it was a start. I went home. The days that followed were the longest of my life. I was a ghost in my own home, haunted by the specter of General Miller lying in the ICU. The hospital's investigation proceeded. I was interviewed, as were Sarah, Dave, and everyone else who was in the ER that night. I told them the unvarnished truth. I expected the letter of termination to arrive any day. About a week later, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Harris. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice devoid of its earlier menace. "Mrs. Miller asked me to call you. The general is stable. He survived the surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain. He's unresponsive, and the doctors say the prognosis is unchanged, but he's fighting. She wanted you to know." The relief that washed over me was so profound, it made me weak. He was alive. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Please tell her thank you." There was a pause on the line. "She also asked me to tell the investigation committee about her conversation with you," Harris added. "She told them she believed your remorse was genuine and that you deserved a chance at redemption. I don't know if it will make a difference, but she insisted." It did make a difference. The final decision from the hospital board was not termination. Citing my otherwise spotless record and the extraordinary circumstances and testimony, they suspended my medical license for 6 months. I was required to undergo mandatory ethics and sensitivity training, as well as counseling for burnout. It was a harsh punishment, but it was not the end. It was a chance to bounce. I served my suspension. I did the counseling. I confronted the burnout and the bitterness that had poisoned me. I spent time volunteering at a free clinic in the inner city, treating patients who had nothing, rediscovering the reasons I became a doctor in the first place, to help, to heal, to see the person, not the label. 6 months later, on the day my license was reinstated, I drove to Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where General Miller had been transferred. I didn't know if they would let me in, but I had to try. I found his room in the long-term care wing. Eleanor was there, sitting by his bedside, reading to him. The general was in a hospital bed, thinner, paler, but his eyes were open. He was looking out the window. He turned his head slowly as I entered. One side of his mouth curved into a slight, crooked smile. He couldn't speak, and his left side was still paralyzed, but there was a light in his eyes, a recognition. Eleanor looked up and smiled warmly. "Dr. Carter, we were hoping you'd come." I walked to the side of the bed, my heart pounding. The general raised his right hand slowly, and I took it. His grip was weak, but it was there. He looked at me, and his eyes held no anger, no judgment, only a quiet, profound understanding that transcended politics, hats, and the worst mistake of my life. In that moment, holding the hand of the man I had so terribly wronged, I finally understood. The oath I took wasn't just about doing no harm. It was about seeing the shared humanity in every patient, no matter what. It was a lesson I had learned at the highest possible cost, a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my days.